Greetings, Rabbi Griscott here with my weekly drasha, my sermon today for Shabbat HaGadol, the Shabbat before Pesach. And this Pesach, of course, we're all dealing with the very difficult circumstance of having to be alone for the Seder, a very difficult pill to swallow indeed. When we say alone, it means two different things. There's some people who are literally alone, isolated, just themselves, which is the most difficult circumstance to be in. And then there's me and Becca who are going to also be alone for the Seder, alone as a family with our two sons, and of course a better situation to be in, but still difficult because we all envision Pesach as being one of fellowship together with friends and family, and we don't get to do that this year. So I wanted to share with you today a tale of two Seders, as I'm calling it, the two Seders that I have had in my life alone. And I grew up completely observant, so you might ask, how is it possible that I had two different occasions to have a Seder just all by myself? Well, that's what I want to share with you today. So, a tale of two Seders. The first one was the worst Seder I ever had, and the second one alone was the best Seder I ever had. Now, that first one was my gap year in Israel, my year studying in yeshiva between high school and college. I was in Jerusalem for Pesach at my aunt and uncle's house in Ramot Bet, neighborhood of Jerusalem, with my cousins. And there's a rabbinic dispute whether a non-Israeli who finds themselves in Israel has to keep the second day of Yom Tov. Outside of Israel, there are 2 days of Yom Tov. In Israel, there's 1 day. We don't need to get into the technicalities now of why, but what if you're not Israeli and you find yourself in Israel? Well, I'm of the stringent opinion that a non-Israeli should keep the full 2 days. I'm not Israeli myself. I haven't earned the right to keep one. So there I was the second night at my aunt and uncle's dining room table, sitting sadly alone with my Seder plate and my 4 cups of wine. My cousins making fun of me in a good-natured way before they went out to go to the mall, even taking photos of me, and I have a funny photo of me holding up a cup of wine with a sort of smirk on my face. My cousin Esty was nice enough to sit and ask me the manishtana, so there was the 5 minutes that I wasn't alone, but that Seder for the most part was just me. I knocked it off in about an hour. It was really quite lame, and but it's funny to look back on, but not so meaningful at the time, not surprisingly. Now, fast forward to 3 years ago, the greatest Seder I ever had. My son Ari was born on the eve of Pesach, 6 p.m., 2 hours before the Seder was to begin, Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan in New York. Becca and I came prepared. We brought our Seder plate and our matzah and maror and all the kosher for Pesach food for the couple days we'd have to spend in the hospital. And that night, Ari was taken to the NICU. He had some jaundice, and thank God, of course, he was okay, but his bris did have to be delayed by a couple of days. And Becca was still kind of drugged and in no position to take part in the Seder. I tried to get her to take part in a few minutes, and then that was it. So it was really just me that night also. Becca, thank God, was okay the second night, and we did the Seder together. But that first night, I was alone, and not surprisingly, that was the most meaningful Seder I've ever had. My first child, my Bechor, my oldest son, was born on the day of the fast of the firstborn, and I was sitting there reflecting on fatherhood and the meaning of the Exodus and liberation, and everything that I was reading in the Haggadah was imbued with a greater sense of meaning. So I was sort of analyzing the difference between these two Seders and what made one so meaningful and one obviously much less so. And at first glance, you'd say, well, it's obvious. I just said it. I just had a child. Of course, I was excited. I was ecstatic. I was happy. But I wanted to delve a little deeper than that, the underlying reasons. I think it relates to anxiety and causes for anxiety in life. When we have anxiety, it comes from a sense of randomness, what in Hebrew is called keri, randomness. Now, that first Seder alone in Israel was quite random. I mentioned there's a dispute whether or not a non-Israeli even has to keep a second day. So on some level, it was my choice. No one around me was keeping Yom Tov. Everyone was going out to the mall. It was random. It was meaningless in that sense. But when I was in the hospital because my child had just been born, it wasn't sad that I was alone. It was imbued with purpose and it was imbued with meaning. I was, quote, supposed to be there. And that, I think, is the crucial factor. Because if we live a life of simple faith, where everything that we do, we imbue with that sense of mission and that sense of purpose, that it's supposed to be that way and it is this way and this is my mission, then everything becomes imbued indeed with meaning. Where's the underlying anxiety coming from this year? There's factor A, which is that it's Passover and I'm supposed to be with family and friends. And there's factor B, which is the sense of this random event and situation comes and imposes over that and takes away from that. But if you embrace everything that happens in our life with a sense of mission and purpose, then there is no A and B. This is my mission this year. And why is it a sacred mission? Because we're staying home for the purpose of the highest of Jewish values, which is pikuach nefesh, which is saving lives. And I want to be careful in the theological point I'm making here. I'm not saying that what some say is that everything happens for a reason and embrace everything that happens to you as being for the good. I'm not necessarily that pious. I don't like saying that to comfort people. There are some situations that are incredibly difficult, and I don't like thinking of, well, just it's all for the good. I'm saying that everything that happens to us, we have to embrace with a sense of mission and purpose to make meaning out of it, because this is the situation of this is my life, and it is therefore sacred inherently and by definition. And I think that is what makes our forefather Abraham indeed so great. The rabbis say that Abraham was tested with Asar Nisyonos, which 10 trials, 10 tests of faith, and he passed them all with flying colors. Think of what happens to Abraham. God tells him, go to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation. He gets to that land, I'm here, and there's a famine, and he has to leave and go down to Egypt. There's no food where God told him to go. He tells him, your descendants will be like the stars of the sky, and his wife is barren, and then she gets kidnapped by Pharaoh. But everything that happens to him, he sort of takes it in stride. And that doesn't mean that he's not upset about it, by the way. It doesn't mean he doesn't complain, because indeed he turns to God. This is very Jewish, and he complains. And he says, God, you're saying my descendants will be like the stars of the heavens, but I only have my servant Eliezer as my successor. I don't have any kids. How do I know that you'll come through? It's kind of chutzpahdik. It's amazing. It's brazen. He said, how do I know you're even going to come through with your promise? So that's what I mean. Don't just accept everything that happens to you. It's all good. It's all for the best. But what does make Avraham great? He stays the course. He stays on the road, and he stays with God even while complaining. He embraces his mission and his purpose. From the very first utterance that God gave him, Lech Lecha, go on your path, he embraces that as his path, and his entire life he's on a mission from God. And to quote sort of tongue-in-cheek from one of my father's favorite movies, The Blues Brothers, what do they say? We're on a mission from God. Well, that's what Avraham is. From that very first Lech Lecha, this is your path, and then therefore everything that happens to him, he says, this is my mission because this is my life. To give an analogy from the army, and I was a chaplain in the army for 6 years, the sense of mission. You're told to take that hill and take it from the enemy, and then you fail and you have to retreat. And now your mission changes, and your mission becomes to retreat safely and save the lives of as many people you can. You don't see it as if the mission failed, and now I'm doing something else which is secondary. Once the nature of the mission changes to retreat and save as many lives as you can, then that becomes your mission, and that becomes sacred, and you have to accomplish that mission. Similar to the movie Apollo 13. Their mission was to go to the moon. They did not succeed in that. Their mission then becomes to bring themselves back to Earth safely, and that becomes sacred in and of itself. It's not that the mission failed, but now we have a new mission, and that has to be embraced with just as much energy and just as much passion. And so I think that that's the mindset that we indeed need to have. This is our mission and our purpose this year, is to be alone. And how are we going to elevate that? And how are we going to make that sacred? But the sense that this is how it's supposed to be this year, because this is the situation we find ourselves in. And so think of my Seder when my son Ari was just born. We don't all have that ecstatic reason for being alone, but I think we can still try to channel some of that adrenaline and excitement I had that I'm supposed to be here. This is where God has placed me this year, and I'm going to make the most sacred experience possible out of it. And so with that mindset, I wish us all a meaningful Pesach in our own homes, whoever you might be sharing that with under your roof.